Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on the Good News Podcast today. And we have a very special guest. His name is Wes Jackson. Wes is a lawyer here in Brampton and does a great job in his practice. So highly recommend him. He also is a community leader, and you may have seen him on socials. He's often very active. He's supporting good causes. This is someone who's really deep, really caring, a beautiful man, and you're going to, I think, catch all of that and more as we have this really important conversation on how do we have important conversations in a way that brings us together and not separate us, not divide us. Something that's so important right now, especially right now. We are grateful for him, for this conversation, and for you that you can join us. Friends, let's dive in. Hey everyone, welcome to the Good News Podcast. Really glad that you could join us for this episode. We have a good friend of mine, Wes Jackson. Wes has been a leader in our community here in Brampton for many years. I love who he is, the way he rolls, what he does. And he and I had a conversation not too long ago where he was telling me about some of the strategies that he's been implementing over the last few years around having conversations with people when we have differences of opinions. And let's face it, we've come, and we'll get into this, we've come through a time and coming through a time where there's been more differences of opinions than ever before. So we really believe that this is good news to share, to enter into the ability to have these conversations. Wes, really grateful for you, for what you do in our community, for your love for this city and beyond, and really appreciate the openness to have this conversation today. Thanks so much for joining us on the Good News Podcast.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So let's jump into this. You expressed to me these differences of terms of being working at calling in and connecting with people as opposed to calling people out. And can you tell us a little bit about what that means? And yeah.
So I came across it quite accidentally. It was a tweet by a celebrity who they were talking about, some other celebrities' past insensitive comments, and how this celebrity responded was, I subscribe to the theory of calling in versus calling out. And that led me to Google that, because just the expression seems self-explanatory, but when you come across something that's profound, you instantly recognize it's profound, and I got to follow up on this, and I did, a lot of reading on it, and so on the level of it being self-explanatory, it really is. It's about saying to somebody, it's inviting them in. It's come here and let's talk about this. And so someone has said something that offends you, okay? And we'll pick on, Chris Rock and Will Smith.
There's a good example.
Because, as a person with male pattern baldness, I could take great offense at a bald joke. I really could. And so if someone cracks a bald joke, and I have a pretty thick skin and a sense of humor, it doesn't particularly offend me, but I know there's an entire hair replacement industry just speaking about male pattern baldness, that it does offend some people. And so let's talk about Will Smith. What did Will Smith do? He called out, both in every sense of the term, literal, figurative, physically, verbally, in every sense of the world, he called Chris Rock out. And what effect did that have? Did it actually elevate the conversation? Did Chris Rock walk away going, maybe I'll never crack that joke again? Or did we have a very different conversation? Whereas, Will Smith could have, and a lot of people have covered this, I won't cover it in detail, but he could have used his speech or his platform to elevate the conversation. And he could have said, Chris, I understand you're a comedian, but for reasons X, Y, Z, some jokes aren't funny, and some things shouldn't be joked about casually as throwaway jokes, and be a better comedian. And then I think we would be having a conversation about the difficulties of beauty standards for actresses in Hollywood and how they're different from beauty standards for men in Hollywood, and some of the diseases that his wife is dealing with. But instead, what are we talking about? We're talking about a physical slap. And what did that accomplish? Not a lot. In certain circles, maybe. In the majority of discussions, it's not about elevating any conversation. So you see it in real time. And, for instance, I was out for a walk with friends, and we were just talking about someone in the group had used the expression, spirit animal. And it wasn't me, but someone else in the group was like, oh, you're really not supposed to say that. And then a third person chimed in, is like, I've heard that you're not supposed to, but I don't understand why.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to chime in with what little I know about it, which isn't much, admittedly. I just know that it's not a respectful use of someone else's culture, so don't. I take that at face value, and I stopped when I learned about the history behind that. And, I've actually printed off a list of various examples along those lines. And, we're all friends out on a walk.
Yeah.
And someone said something, and it wasn't about, oh, you're off the walk, turn around and go back to your car.
Mm-hmm.
It was, oh man, you know what I just recently read? I read an article about how that is offensive and how, well, I don't really understand why not. Well, this is what I've read about it. And it was a discussion amongst friends.
Yeah.
And if you can talk to a stranger the way you talk to your friends about something offensive that's been said, I think you get a lot further.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there are just so many examples in my own life, on social media especially, and goes back to the basic wisdom you heard as a kid. It just reinforces itself all the time. And forgive me if I butcher the expression, but you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. How simple a concept is calling in versus calling out when you relate it to that honey versus vinegar and catching flies analogy that we all heard growing up. It's the same idea said slightly differently. And it can be very powerful, and you can really see the way other people think about things. They see the way you think about things, and everyone walks away, and it's not hostile. It's not confrontational. It elevates.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that word, elevate. It elevates the conversation. And you also use the word understand. There's a sense of understanding where someone's coming, because so often we don't actually understand. We don't take the time to listen or ask questions for whatever reason to really know where people are coming from. And my experience has been not just with people who maybe are strangers who we don't understand, but even sometimes with the people who we're closest to. We'll either avoid those topics or we have an understanding to not talk about them because we know we're on such different, as opposed to, which in some ways is it's not as aggressive as Will Smith, but it's not an elevation of the conversation for sure when we're letting it sit there, not talking about it. Why do you think people don't do the calling in and resort to the calling out, if you will? What's your sense of what's behind that? Because that might help us to even think about our own patterns and what we do, as well as as leaders helping others do the same. But what's your sense of why people would resort to the calling out piece as opposed to? Because I don't know how anyone could hear this and I think, oh, that might be challenging, but that sounds so much better than the calling out, to call in, to understand, to deepen, to elevate. But why would people not do it? What's the sense of, or the human condition, or whatever it is that leads people to do that?
It's multifaceted, as life tends to be.
Yeah, for sure.
Number one, the gut reaction is to blame the anonymity of social media, because there's a great analogy about men talking to women. And it's like, don't say, I'm speaking from my perspective as a man here, don't say to a woman in the workplace what you wouldn't say to Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Like, oh, you look good in those jeans, or that's a low cut top. Would you look The Rock Johnson in the face and say that? No, because he would eat you for lunch. So why would you say it to a female coworker? You boil it down to that level, and suddenly it's not so mystifying what you can and can't say at work. But because it's anonymous, I can go on Twitter and I can, shots fired at people I've never met, people I will never meet, because they're never going to, to put it in the crudest terms, slap me for it. They're not going to punch me in the face for saying something offensive. They'll just troll back. So, but I think it is more complicated than that. It's more nuanced. There's a leadership component to it. So just as, the conversation moved from, the 1980s, be colorblind, don't see color, and that was meant to be the answer to racial tensions. And that conversation over time evolved and elevated again to no, learn and appreciate other cultures. Don't pretend they don't exist. And then the conversation in the last decade or so is moving from, it's not enough to not be racist, you have to be anti-racist. And so again, when it comes to things like calling out, you can look through history and it was like, well, this big corporation has done something offensive, boycott them. Okay, so we all sort of grew up with a sense of, well, boycott them, vote with your dollar, cut off the dollars, change the behavior. And I'm not saying there's not a role for that in our society. Absolutely there is. But to jump to that right away skips over all the consultation in the meantime, all the, from legal background, which is my background, all the alternative dispute resolution. When my clients have a dispute, it's not, okay, run to the courthouse and file a lawsuit. It's make a phone call, send a letter, propose alternatives. And you escalate it step by step. You don't jump to filing a lawsuit because all you're doing is inviting tens of thousands in litigation costs. That doesn't help anybody. And so when you're confronted with a stranger who has said something that's offensive to you, I can't call Chris Rock up and say, as a person with a genetic baldness condition that offends me, he's not going to take my call. But I can go on Twitter and be like, oh, Chris Rock, you're insert whatever term you want to use, evil, insensitive, whatever. And maybe I'll be heard. So natural desire to be heard. Sometimes there's a tendency to believe that the loudest voice will be heard. So I have to say things in the loudest, most offensive way for anyone to notice. I got to be heard amongst social media. It's everyone in the world has access to it. How do you be heard other than upping the ante with something? And so I think a lot of that stuff informs this instinct to call out and jump right to, you must be denounced, you must be cast out, you must. It's very difficult to feel like I'm going to make a difference saying, I really think that the people of the Nestle Corporation should do more around their treatment of natural sourced water and the bottling of water. I haven't made any noise when I just say it like that. So I got to go to calling out to be noticed. And I think it's important to ignore that instinct. A story, you talk about with friends and family and how to disagree respectfully. So I try not to use the term anti-vaxxer, but for shorthand, I'll use that. So a friend of mine doesn't believe in vaccinations. But having said that, they don't believe in any vaccinations, not any of the standards. So when COVID vaccines came along, of course, they were not signing up for COVID vaccines. Why would they suddenly change their mind? So it would be easy to quickly say, oh, you're an anti-vaxxer, you're a conspiracy theorist, you're all these negative terms I can throw at you. But it's more important to step back and say, well, why? Why is he taking this stance? And what I've always understood, because he's a friend, is he truly in his heart of hearts believes that what he's doing is best for himself, best for his family. I may believe that the best way to protect myself and protect my family is through a vaccination. He fundamentally believes the best way to protect himself and his family is to not get vaccinated because he doesn't know it's in the vaccines. The studies aren't done. And for all the reasons he believes what he believes. So if I can remember his motivation is to protect his family, well, my motivation is to protect my family. That is common ground. So when we talk about it, and we don't talk about it at length, before I even type, hello, I'm like, okay, remember, he's protecting his family. How can I respond to what he's saying in that paradigm? And we're still friends, going on how long we've been living with COVID now and the COVID regimes. And, he made a great point about airline. You can't, if you're not vaccinated, take a flight, but you can go to an arena and watch a hockey game. Well, how is that different? Is the science different at a hockey arena than it is at an airport? And, I'm very sympathetic to that argument. I'm not a scientist. I'm not an immunologist. I don't know what the answer to that is. But at the same time, I understand where he's coming from. It's about protecting his family and asking, why can't my family get on a plane just because we made the choice that we believe protects ourselves? And when you phrase the question in that way, it's actually harder to engage in calling out because I've actually empathized with him. I haven't, like I say, I ran to Google. I looked up this whole paradigm calling out. And it is about, calling out. I'll just use some of the terms.
Yeah, please.
Shame, humiliation, and dehumanization. That's what calling out is fundamentally about. Whereas calling in is about love, respect, and reaching mutual understandings. So why would I call him out for trying to protect his family? I mean, that doesn't make sense even to me. I'm very protective of my family, so I 100% get where he's coming from. Start there, then build on the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I like to think that all of our exchanges on the topic have been very respectful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I haven't lost any respect for him. I haven't felt any need to unfriend him.
Yeah.
Even if I still disagree with some of his decisions, well, that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't disagree with why he's making his decisions.
Yeah. No, boy. Hey, and that is, I think what you just said is, wow, it's so significant to me to be able to disagree and still be okay, to not be like, it's one thing to convince people to think like you do, or to, and which is often how people enter into these conversations. That's their motivation. What I'm hearing is a very different motivation, to really enter into a conversation and listen and understand. And it's interesting, the word humiliation was part of what happens when we call people out. And I suspect that if we're being honest with ourselves, often we're so angry, we're so emotionally engaged, not necessarily in a healthy way either, that we are almost striving for that, to humiliate someone so that they might think what we think and believe what we think and say what we say and agree with what we agree with. Whereas, in many ways, the opposite is humility, and where that's been a huge piece for me, to have the humility to listen, the humility to actually enter into something that's so difficult and complex that I may not be right. That I really want to genuinely understand why this person thinks that, believes that, acts that way, to try to come to a better understanding of it. And I've experienced through the pandemic just a really challenging place as a leader to try to love people on both sides, if I could say, around the vaccination. And it was very challenging, but it led me into some conversations where I really did need to do a better job of listening. And I just want to confess, I wasn't there right away. But over time, as God got me there, things shifted in me in a way that for me, the most important issue became, can we not be divided? Like, can we be one people? Can we be united? Like, life is hard enough right now. This isn't helping. How do we understand that people have different views on people who are, in my mind, equally beautiful, equally brilliant, equally, I respect, and just came to a point where, wow, I don't know how we get there, but if we could get there, that's elevating the conversation beyond the pandemic, beyond vaccinate, beyond, but so I just keep loving this term that I'm glad you brought some thought, ideas and research to it. And just want to thank you again. And yeah, I know you guys, so please, jump in, because
I just want to point out to you, when you listen to this back, I want you to listen to the language you just used just there, because you started with the word I several times. And by the end of what you just said, you were using the word we. Listen back to that, because it's part of, the reading that you'll do if you look this stuff up about calling in and calling out. We, us. So my office has a mask policy. My clients have to mask up. And some of my clients aren't appreciative of that policy. But when I explain, look, myself and some of our staff have immunocompromised children. My son's asthma is so bad, he's been hospitalized for it. We have to wear masks when we're meeting with strangers. And I know it's uncomfortable. I know it makes it hard to breathe. I know it makes it hard to communicate the way you naturally communicate. But if you can just, appreciate the fact that I don't want my immunocompromised son to be hospitalized with COVID with his health, it is only for a few minutes. And if you're uncomfortable, I'll do everything I can to make this meeting go as fast as you can. And if it's really unbearable, we can move this to a Zoom meeting. But we'll figure out a way to get through this. And I have yet to have a client respond to that with, well, forget your son. Not once. Because you have to move the conversation from I to we, I to us. And when you reflect back to them their concerns, and whether you agree with them or not, they are their concerns. They are uncomfortable. Yeah. They are finding it hard to breathe. Maybe they just think it's ridiculous. Maybe they're just anti-government. Maybe they're just anti-mask because they just don't like, it hurts their ears. I have no idea why. But when they understand that I'm not just being, whatever word you want to use, particular or insisting for no reason, and they realize there's a reason behind it, all that hostility disappears. Because I'm not just being arbitrary and unfair and saying, I put on a mask because I'm on a power trip. it's because there's legitimate health concerns behind it. And like I say, no one really pushes back on that. And so, you know, you've actually mentioned some of these struggles before to me. So I do kind of know a little bit about that you went through that. But it sounds like you made that transition from the I of it to the us of it and the we of it. And I fully appreciate, you know, a lot of my clients, when we offer them Zoom meetings, I know the reason why they don't want that is because they miss just the human interaction.
Yeah, absolutely.
They miss going to their doctor. They miss going to their lawyer. They miss going to church. They miss going out grocery shopping. They just want to go out. They want to look at different walls, and they're in Zoom meetings all day. They don't want one more Zoom meeting. So I get it. That's a human need. And if we can avoid it, we will, because that's better for public health. But at the same time, if that's what that person needs, and we have a little signing room in our office that we can spray with Lysol and sanitize everything, and they're wearing masks, and there's hand sanitizer on the wall and in containers on the table, and it can be done in a safe way, that's what we do. And you know, there's physical dividers between that meeting room and the rest of the office in terms of windows and doors. So we make those accommodations, just like I would accommodate someone who had mobility limitations. I've driven to so many of my clients' houses over the years because they can't get out of the house to come to my office. I had an office that was up a couple of stairs in the past, and you know, I'd go to the client's house. Well, if I can accommodate that, I can accommodate other limitations, be they, you know, philosophical, attitudinal, just the discomfort of a mask. I mean, we'll work around it because, again, we will work around it. We will figure out a way to get your, whatever it is, your real estate done, your will done, whatever it is. But if you tell me what exactly your concerns are, that's the first step in the conversation of solving the problem. And, you know, solving the problem, don't call it calling in, call it solving the problem. And so you've got a coworker who says, I don't want to be inflammatory, but let's say they use the R word casually, which is, you know, not particularly PC in the modern environment for obviously very valid reasons. You can try to shame them, you can try to humiliate them, or you can ask. And I've printed them off and I sent them to you by email.
Because even though, because this, I think this is a great example. Because I feel what you're giving us, Wes, is concrete language that we can use to try to work at this and become that we, to not elevate in a good way, because sometimes we can elevate in a negative way that just gets maybe even like because someone might face an issue where they see something and like, oh, you know, and sometimes something is not correct. You know, it's good to have some teaching on how to maybe offer that in a different way. And the stuff I was looking through, it offers that kind of, because sometimes we may not know even how to do that. And sometimes how we do it really, really matters. Like that makes all the difference in the world. So that would be helpful to kind of take us through some of the language. Yeah.
And so this is from an organization, Seed the Way, Education for Justice and Equity, seedtheway.com. I'm not taking credit for any of this.
Yeah.
You know, this is a found resource. So they have a chart for calling out and a chart for calling in. I'll just read some examples. So, wow, ouch, I need you to stop right there. That's a calling out. And I need you to know how your comment just landed on me. You know, that's going to put a stop to a conversation for sure, but in a way that I think is respectful. I don't think that in any way says to the person, you're a bad person for saying that, but it does alert them to the fact that they've said something which has landed for you in a way that's not okay for a work environment or a community environment. Things like that's not our culture here. Those aren't our values. That might be something that I would say to a client, and this has happened over the years, where our clients will say things of a racially insensitive nature. You know, I tell this story. I don't think it's that inflammatory. I was working for a Jewish lawyer at the time. Our client didn't know that, but our client kept going on and on about how this person had, and forgive me, but they Jewed me. And they must use that expression 5 times. At which point my boss just kind of said, well, it's okay. You've come to a good Jewish boy to help you out.
Mm.
At which point the person's, like, the color left their face and they were like, oh, I didn't realize you were Jewish.
Yeah.
He's like, it's fine. Just let's move on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know? So like I say, I think he handled it well.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't asking the person to leave.
Mm-hmm.
He was still there to offer help, offer the services of a lawyer, but did just like, okay, you need to put a stop to that language.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know,
and use subtle humor in some ways to get at it.
That's along the lines of, that's not our culture here.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
And sometimes it sounds like that person's reaction, and you can't always control the person's reaction, which, is beyond our control. But sometimes the person, in the best case scenario, actually would love to know. I know people have pointed out to me language that I've used, I'm like, oh my gosh, thank you. Like that's really helpful to me because I want to speak things in a way that's helpful for all people that all people can hear. And we're human, and no one's gets it right all the time. So it's but I think sometimes people just can be really helped by having someone help them understand.
Oh, do you hate a child who doesn't know right from wrong?
Yeah.
No, of course you don't.
Yeah.
So why would I hate a client? Why would I hate a vendor or a supplier?
Yeah.
Why would I hate the store clerk or anybody?
Mm-hmm.
Ignorance is one of those things that we lose patience for as we grow older because we kind of expect those around us to know what we know.
Mm-hmm.
But I've read tons of articles where they talk about racially insensitive language, especially against the First Nations people. And there was this article I read. It was so eye-opening. Expressions like circle the wagons, run that up the flagpole.
Mm-hmm.
Just casually referring to people as chief.
Mm-hmm.
No, don't. And here's why.
Yeah.
And I wish I'd brought that article with me, but and I read that article. I was like, okay, no more.
Yeah. Yeah. No one wants to become aware of it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Now that I know.
Yeah.
And with the internet, you can't expect everyone to spend their internet browsing time looking up, what to say and what not to say. It's not a reasonable expectation. So when you have a friend or a coworker say something, it's as easy as, I used to say that, and now I don't because I read. And you can leave it at that, and let it marinate. Yeah, and let them think about it.
Yeah. And the tone that you're using is very different, I think, than when the emotion, calls somebody out. There's often emotion that isn't helpful sometimes, and the way even you're saying these things. I read something, and I've just really tried to frame it a bit differently. That tone is so different, like how we have these conversations. Yeah.
And so, bring in the humor.
Yeah.
Would you say that if The Rock was in the room? Yeah. Would you say that if a person of color was in the room? And if the answer is no, I was like, well, why are you saying it to me? Because you don't necessarily know my background. Now I can tell you it's Heinz 57. I got a little bit of everything from all over Europe in my background, but you don't know. And it's funny. A lot of friends do these ancestry. You take your cheek swab, you send it in, and they're finding out all sorts of things about their genetic makeup that they never realized, and they're going off and they're doing this independent research, and they're like, oh, I didn't know this about even my own heritage, let alone the heritage of others. So I think there is a very modern curiosity around the larger world, and it is leading to a lot of natural discovery of some of these things. But turning to the calling in sheet of this resource, you can say it is, I'm curious, what was your intention when you said that? So going back to my example of someone using the R word, you can say, how does that word fit in with what you're trying to say to me? As opposed to a different word. And it can lead to a conversation. If you're met with hostility, a dear friend of mine in his lifetime, he had been a commercial realtor for 50 years, and he was one of the founding members of Kiwanis, and they had, early on, they had built a school for people with different abilities, and he would refer to it as the school for the R word. And he was in his 80s, and you could tell him till you were blue in the face, you don't use that word anymore. You're like, I built that school, don't tell me. Don't tell me I mean something nefarious by that. I don't. I dedicated many years of my life to helping people in that situation. How can you tell me that is negative or comes from a place of darkness or hatred? It's like, okay, I'm not going to change your mind. But having said that, having that conversation with him clarifies that his intention is that's just the word. It doesn't mean what you're trying to make it mean, and don't make me out to mean something that I didn't mean by that word.
Yeah, I'm curious why you say that is so very different than you can't say that, right? Because you can't say that humiliates this guy, and I'm curious, and then you get in that conversation, and sometimes if you just leave it there, he might come to his own decision and rethinking of it. And you've enabled him to do that as opposed to just humiliated him and ensured that he doesn't.
Yeah, well, it's the difference between you can't say that because I'm offended.
Yeah.
Versus, we don't like to use that word because we understand that it can be offensive to certain groups.
Yeah. Yes.
We as opposed to I. Yeah. We as opposed to you. Us.
Yeah.
These words really take the edge off of confronting people about certain things that, like I say, ignorance is a powerful thing, and they may just not have known.
Absolutely.
And to pounce on ignorance as opposed to shining a light on it is two different things. And so, one of the things that in my notes I want to talk about, and kind of, the modern day problems, when you talk about neurodivergence. Okay, so both of my kids have ADD. I have ADD. Like I say, I have a thick skin. I have a sense of humor. You can crack all kinds of jokes. I'm not going to be overly offended by it or think that you're attacking me. But having said that, I don't want to hear my kids' teachers, making light of it or, sort of downplaying what's in their IEP to address this, or, calling them, say someone goes, oh, your kid's crazy because of this. Context matters. 100% context matters. Yeah. And that's where, the protecting family thing I've already alluded to comes in. So, and I haven't had to, don't get me wrong.
Sure. Yeah.
But, I'm prepared for the day that we run into a teacher who doesn't know left from right when it comes to dealing with kids with ADHD and having those conversations. And again, it's not going to be from my kid has, so you can't say, and you can't. No, it's going to be like, well, look, like the best strategy to teach this kid is going to be, you're going to be better at your job if you approach it this way. Who doesn't want to be better at their job? Everybody wants to be better at their job.
Yeah.
And so, one of the expressions, this comes from just an article about, things you don't say anymore. And one of them is brainstorming. I was like, why can't you use brainstorming? Think of things you didn't know yesterday that I know today.
Yeah.
I was like, because people who are neurodivergent, people who are epileptic, that word means something different to them. And when I use it for just, let's just get together and kick around ideas, that's not how it's landing for them. So now I've resolved, I'm not going to use that expression the way that I used to use that expression. The word savage. Now, lately on the internet, there's a lot of memes about, that prank was savage or that insult was savage. This article talks about for the First Nations people and our Indigenous, that's the N-word for them. And it's like,
yeah.
I've been saying that out of ignorance, not realize because it was being said in a certain context and with a certain intention. It didn't register for me until someone pointed out to me, I certainly wouldn't be like, that insult was, drop an N-bomb. So why would I be like, that insult was drop an S-bomb, right? So that word's coming out of my vocabulary. Yeah. And I got to have the conversation with my kids because they're into memes and the funny TikToks, the fail army stuff. They'll say it. Now I have to sit down with them and just say, look, that's not a word that we are going to use because our friends in that community might hear it and might be hurt by it.
Yeah.
And my kids, all you got to do to explain to my kids that might hurt somebody, it's gone. It's off the table. And a great friend of mine since childhood, his son is a little bit older than our oldest daughter. And we were talking about rap music, and I was bemoaning the fact that I always have to, on my Apple Music, make sure that, the little box with the E, I got to skip those songs because, and we were talking about, rap music, especially in the use of the N-word. And I said, how have you approached that with your son? And he says, simple. I said, it's not our word. because he's going to hear this. He's going to hear it.
Yeah.
It's out there in the world. Certain artistic communities use it liberally. He's like, but Eric, it's not our word. I don't use it. You don't use it. It's not that if you hear it, something bad has happened. You don't have to run and turn off the radio. You don't have to do any of those things, because that's coming from the community.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's their word.
Yeah.
So if you hear them use it, that's fine, but it's not our word.
Yeah.
So don't.
Yeah.
And that was the end of the conversation. So how easy is that as a conversation with your kids? You know?
I love how this concept can impact your whole life, like your family, your work, everything. And so, for you, Wes, how has this impacted you? How has this idea of just redirecting, calling in versus calling out, how has it impacted you, and how do you see it impacting others around you?
Well, listen, I'm the guy who gets called in all the time. Like I say, I've got a dark sense of humor. Okay. Nothing really is off limits for my sense of humor. It's how I was born. I won't name names, but I have friends, I have family members, identify as gay or otherwise. I don't want to go too far down that road, because, they're not here to speak for themselves. And they're the first to be like, come on, Wes, the line is here and you're there. Okay, I'll call it back. And, I'll even say to my employees, look, I've got a sense of humor. If I've ever crossed the line, the door is open to say, Wes, the line is here, you're there, bring it back. Yeah. And I instantly will. Because
so giving people permission to
100%.
Talk about these things.
So you have to lead by example.
Awesome. Yeah.
So many times in my life, I like I say, I'm the guy who's been like, look, I appreciate you were joking, but bring it back. Same friend out in BC, I had made a play on the word bike, as in bicycle, and curious, to be like, oh, bike curious. And he was just like, I appreciate your joking, but and he listed off our friends who identify as bisexual. He's like, would you say that to them? I said, well, of course I would, because to me, it's just a play on words. He's like, I suggest that you don't. And that was the end of the conversation. Okay, and like I say, we've been friends since grade 3. We're still friends. Yeah. When I die, I will consider him my friend. And what I did is I went and I marinated on it and I reflected on it. Yeah. And I decided, you know what? I don't know if he's right or if I'm right, but I'll err on the side of caution. Yeah. Because what am I, a professional stand-up comedian? No, I'm a lawyer in Brampton. So I don't need to stake something on a joke that I think is funny. Yeah. If someone tells me offensive, I accept that it is. It's off the table. So off I move on with my life. And my life is no worse for the wear, for being, 0.5% more sensitive than I was before. How does it hurt me? It doesn't. And when you think about leadership and you think about a growth mentality, and I want to circle back to another, a great resource. It's a podcast, and this podcaster, Gary John Bishop is his name, and he does curse a lot, so fair warning. But he always talks about the difference between blame and responsibility. And blame is about being right, me being right and you being wrong. I blame you. Responsibility is more like, look, it's snowing and the roads are icy. You're the driver of the car. Is it your fault that the roads are icy? No. Is it your responsibility to get yourself home safely in your car? Yes. Blame and responsibility are two different ideas. Calling out is about blame. Calling in is about taking responsibility for the conversation. So it's not my fault if you've said something. Let's say you use that old he gypped me, and I read why that's not an appropriate thing to say, and so am I just going to blame you and be like, oh, you've said something offensive and you're a bad person and no one should talk to you and no one should go to your church and all those things? No, I'm going to take responsibility for the conversation. I say, I don't know if you know this, but that word actually comes from and means this. And I know it's been used to describe financial transactions, but only because of the racially insensitive implications of the word. And, you might want to be careful about, if you're saying that intentionally and you're comfortable with that, fill your boots. But if you're doing it because you just didn't know that was the background of the word, you should kind of know that that's how it's going to land for people. And guess which of those conversations is going to get me further in changing the way you go through life? So I'm going to take responsibility. And when I'm in the wrong, I'm going to take responsibility. And if I know that I've hurt somebody, I'm going to seek them out and see if they're open to hear my apology. Because I'm going to take responsibility for repairing any damage that I've done. And I'm not going to say, oh, you're too sensitive. That's a blame mentality. And maybe that's the way I feel, but if I think about it, authors are responsible for their words. And so if I've hurt somebody, hopefully it's because I intended to hurt them, which I prefer to think is not very often. But by taking responsibility, I'm going to lead, I'm going to grow, I'm going to make my life better, because I'm going to attract people who want to lead and people who want to grow and make their lives better. Or I can shift into blame mentality, and I can find myself with peers who are also stuck in a blame mentality. And guess who's at the top of the Fortune 500 list? The builders and the growers, or the blamers? So if I want the best possible life I can lead, I'm going to surround myself with people who are leading the best life they can lead. And that's the responsibility mindset. And so if I can teach my kids, if I can teach as I learn and read, like I say, even just casual conversations while you're walking in the park. Can you be like, oh, have you read that article? Just like you would say, have you read that book? I read a great article about. You want me to send it to you? Yes, no, maybe, who knows? What you've offered.
Yeah, absolutely.
And by leading by, even just by leading by example.
Modeling it. You're modeling it big time.
Totally. It's so important. It's so huge. And you make such an impact in everyone around you. And, maybe they're not ready for it today. But as they see your life building and growing, one day they will be ready for it. They'll be ready for the conversation eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh man, Wes, thank you so much. I've learned so much. We've learned so much in this conversation, and just really believe this conversation is so important to us right now as a people, as a human race, to work for it to be a we, as you say, not an I, not about me, it's about we, and really, really to live into that, to create unity wherever we can rather than division. The world will be a better place, is a better place as we do that. So thanks so much, my man. Just really appreciate you. Want to end with a little good news, rapid fire here, if we could. So, what's the best thing going on in your home, in your home these days?
Listen, the kids are back in school. They're loving it. They did well in online school. They're back in school. They're more active. They're happier. They're socially integrating back into their friend circles. That's great. My wife's got a exciting new position through her work. My work continues to grow, my business. I just entered my first ever photo contest through a Beaux Arts contest.
Nice. Learned
a ton. Didn't win. That's okay. What I learned is the victory. That's been great. Our dog is a dog now, not a puppy. He's 18 months, so he's getting over some of his bad puppy habits. That's great. So it's a lot of positives, a lot of things to be grateful for. None of us have come down with COVID. My brother-in-law did, but he was fine, and didn't pass it on to his son or his wife because they isolated properly, did everything they needed to do.
Amazing.
So everyone's healthy, everyone's happy. So,
awesome. And what's the best thing going on in your neighborhood, in your community?
My wife is door knocking for her candidate of choice.
Okay.
Brought the kids out with her. They both loved it. Loved knocking on the doors. We went to Kiwanis Park. I don't know if you heard of the organization People Against Littering that are very active in Brampton. So we went out to the Kiwanis Park cleanup and filled up 3 bags of garbage. So where I walk my dog every week, was able to take the kids and take a little bit of responsibility for keeping that park clean. And when we were out door knocking, we came across litter in the gutter and took out one of the dog bags. Put it over my hand, picked up the garbage off the street, and the kids were like, "Oh yeah, we're People Against Littering." I was so proud of them in that moment because they just recognized.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it takes a second to pick up a piece of trash, and now the neighborhood's more beautiful.
Yeah. That's awesome. Love it. And what's the best thing going on in our world these days?
I often have trouble answering that question because of all the negativity in the world. But I will say this. Speaking of my daughter being back in school, one of her projects for school was to research, and I want to get the name of this right, the UN Sustainable Goals. And the project was, what is Canada doing locally, provincially, and nationally to implement the UN Sustainability Goals? And of course, she needed our help with the research. And let me tell you, it was so refreshing to realize that the challenge was to narrow the list down. The number of organizations that are working on fresh water, cleaning the environment, increasing access to justice, increasing equality of women and girls in the workforce and in educational. It was just like such a breath of fresh air when there's news of war, news of COVID, travel, all the negativity, to be like, yes, but at the same time, there's good people doing good work, really trying to keep all that good work going in a concerted international effort to just make the world a better place, make the environment a cleaner place, the air cleaner, the water cleaner, all that stuff.
Oh.
And so, just realizing that the challenge was whittling the list down, as opposed to struggling to find, was just such a reset moment in my mind. So I'm going to list that as my what's going on in the world that's good, was just a reminder that with everything negative going on, there's people out there fighting the good fight on so many fronts.
Right on.
They don't make the news. You may never hear about them, but they're out there doing it every day.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love it came through your daughter too. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's so awesome. That's so awesome. Well, hey, let's close with prayer. We've covered a lot of ground here today and appreciated every little bit of it. So let's close in prayer. Oh God, thank you so much for the depth of this conversation. Help us all to live into it, to live into this better world where we listen deeply, we respect each other, we do our very best to understand and grow and take responsibility for those places, our own behaviors, our own words, our actions, and somehow to enable others to as well in a gracious, humble, beautiful way. So we've been offered many ideas, concrete ideas on how to do that today. So thank you for Wes, for his leadership, for his wisdom, for your work in his life. And I love where we ended, that there's challenges that continue to go on in our world, in our community, but there are lots of people who are working to overcome them, to bring healing and hope. And thank you that we can join you and be a part of that. So all of this, we give you thanks and praise in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Wes, thanks again so much. Great to appreciate your friendship, appreciate your leadership, and appreciate you being on the Good News Podcast today.
I have all the time in the world for you, so anytime.
No, thanks, Wes. Awesome.
Thanks.
Look forward to doing it again. Again. And friends, thank you for joining us today on the Good News Podcast. Great to be with you. I hope you have been as inspired and encouraged and even challenged as I have, as we have. And let's live into this together. Thanks again for being a part of the conversation today. Hope to see you again soon. God bless you. Well, thanks, friends, again for being a part of this very important conversation. And I don't know about you, but I am going to be thinking about this. I just know all over the place. Where in my life, where in leadership, in my neighborhood, where can we really work towards bringing people together, bringing things together, calling in as opposed to calling out, and the impact that can have. This conversation has impacted me greatly, and I hope it has you as well. I learned so much from Wes, so much from this conversation, and really can't wait to live it out together. And I think about it, Jesus would love this conversation. Jesus was all about bringing unity rather than division, bringing people together as human beings. And we just heard that loud and clear today. So how do we elevate the conversation? How do we seek to understand people, to ask questions, to listen, to get a sense of where they're coming from, to respect people, to do that with humility and grace? All of that is part of what we just heard today. All that's part of the challenge to us as we go and live this out. But friends, you can do it. You're not alone. God is with you. Let's work at this together. Thanks again for being a part of this Good News Podcast family. God bless you. God be with you. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Good News with Jamie Holtum. You can share this. You can like this. You can pass it on to others. And please just keep the good news going, if you will. God bless you. Hope to see you again soon. Thanks so much.